Hello everybody and welcome to another classic WoW podcast. I am your host Mao and I am joined today with Mythoclast and Candice. How you doing today, guys?
Oh, today's been pretty good. How's it going, Cand?
Going well. Some good PvP times in Feralis today.
Oh yeah, we had some plans to maybe try a couple of jump runs before while we were doing this podcast today. Didn't quite work out. Tip of the cap to the Alliance, wasn't letting us get into Dire Maul, and we got a little bit of talking about what the World of Warcraft has done and changed. So week 2 is now here. Week 1 of PvP is completely finished. How are things looking for you guys now that we're now into the second week and Battlegrounds have been announced?
Well, to start, I'm pretty excited about Battlegrounds. I didn't really plan to push super hard honor-wise before Battlegrounds came out, but we'll actually see if I can snag a decent two-handed weapon and actually get a group together for some more song. Should be fun.
I mean, I kind of am enjoying this quite a lot. I think that it makes a bunch of organic gameplay. You can never predict how things are going to go. It's extremely different from any Battleground that's going to come out, and I think it's interesting. No matter even when things go poorly, you can just migrate to a different area. Whereas if things go poorly in Battlegrounds all day, you have the risk of just running into the same stomp fest over and over.
Hopefully cross-server Battlegrounds will alleviate playing the same teams too many times. That was definitely an issue before that, though. But now you're definitely right about what we're seeing in terms of the dynamic world. I've also started to create some rivalries, maybe some friendly rivalries, some more competitive rivalries while we've been out in the world. I feel like I know who is out on the server more than I did 2 weeks ago before we were out killing, but I also know there are some level 48s to maybe 59 range that is not necessarily having the greatest time right now. So hopefully the announcement of December 10th Battlegrounds will help with some of that. But in the meantime, it's been a pretty fun time for the PvPers, I have to admit. I've been out there pretty much nonstop. I've done my fair share of killing people and have been killed plenty of times out there. What have you guys experienced out in the world in this last week, and has things changed for you a little bit in terms of the way people are going about camping and everything?
Okay, so strangely enough, it has completely changed how people are gathering resources. Almost to the point where there are more resources now than when there was layering going on. Like, I run around and I'll get, like, I was in Najara this morning and I hit every single Dreamfoil node that was marked with my add-on. They were all up. I got like 25 Dreamfoil and like 7 or 18 Mountain Sage.
That's
17 to 18 Mountain Silver.
That's pretty good. That's a lot of gold right there. I've had quite a bit of luck myself with the Black Lotuses and the Arcane Crystals because same thing. I'm seeing more nodes up now.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah, I can vouch for that also. I think yesterday, it was either yesterday or the day before, I found 8 rich thorium veins and burning steps in one circle of the zone. It was incredible. Like, more than I'd ever seen, even when there were 4 layers.
Yeah, if you're willing to take the risk of being ganked by a group, then definitely get out there and start your gathering going, because there's nodes to be had. On the flip side of that, if you're trying to get some kills out there, check those herbalism inviting areas, guys. I know I do, because I have those professions, so already know a few people from those routes, and we definitely get into it a little bit for the PvP as well. But another big announcement that came out this past week was Blackwing Lair will be coming early 2020. Very exciting news on that. What do you guys think about that?
Personally, I think it's incredible. BWL marks the first attempt, like real attempt at a raid development, I think, that the Blizzard team ever did. Like, obviously they made Molten Core, but they made that during during the early stages of their development of the game of World of Warcraft.
And it only took a week.
BWL was the first actual huge content patch that ever came to this game, and you can tell from like the art of all the class sets and the weapons and the armor in there that they tried really hard, and I think BWL is one of the best raid zones.
I'm a huge fan of Blackwing Lair. One of my favorite raid zones back in vanilla. It's really was a challenge back in the time. Certainly, we know more about the game now than we did back when it was first released. But I do believe that Blackwing Lair will be giving some of the newcomers a challenge. There's some tricks up its sleeve that definitely aren't seen in Molten Core.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, all of the fights are much more complicated and challenging than even the hardest fight in Molten Core.
Yeah, you're going to jump into the very, very first fight and get mechanics that are completely unseen in an MMO prior to that, really, with so many ads and so much chaos. And then jumping into another one with so much damage going out that it's all, I remember being a priest at the time for that fight. It was a very fun healer fight with so much damage going out on Veilstraz. So there's going to be some fun fights coming up.
I'm actually pretty curious if they'll leave the old Veil and Nefarian issues in, where one, Veil would despawn if you wipe to him a certain number of times each week. I don't know if that'll be in this version of Classic. And 2, I wonder if Nefarian's still going to have a 15-minute respawn time if you wipe on Nefarian.
Yeah, I'm very interested to know that as well. Actually, I don't remember where in the patch, everything got shuffled up. So if somebody out there is listening, you do remember the patch order, go ahead and leave a comment in YouTube or drop us a comment on the thread on Reddit, and just let us know what you remember about what we should be expecting in terms of the respawn times on that. So we've got Battlegrounds coming. I think that's going to completely change the way people are grinding Honor. And right now, I feel like it's shifted to sort of like there's some hot spots going. And if you can kind of stay out of those hot spots, it's a good thing. But if you're trying to work your way through them, Dire Maul, Blackrock Mountain, any of these places to get to a dungeon, it's been pretty rough. As we mentioned at the beginning of the cast, we were trying to get to Dire Maul ourselves. Wasn't possible at this time of day. Do we think it's going to still see a little bit of this, or do you think that it's just going to kind of go back to business as usual like it did in Phase 1 once we hit Battlegrounds?
Well, I think we will still see quite a bit of this. Maybe not on this scale, but at peak hours, if you put 2 or 3 rogues in those Dire Maul hallways, you will probably still make like very competitive Honor against people that are spamming Battlegrounds. Especially if you're not spamming it with other people.
Absolutely. I think there'll be no shortage of World PvP once that comes out. There'll be obviously the hardcore groups and the people who are pushing for the highest ranks who transition into like Warsong Gulch farming. But for the most part, from a rogue perspective, the open world is way easier to get kills in than a Warsong Gulch.
And the rogues have gotten very creative these days. We're seeing camping cities, camping common AFK spots. The rogues are definitely out in force, and they're starting to team up with some druids and other rogues and things like that as well. There's some pretty deadly gank forces out there right now, and a lot of creativity about where and how you can get those kills, especially when you have ways to hide yourself and get yourself out of combat the way that rogues do.
Yeah, I've seen several like night elf hunters in those rogue groups with shadow meld as well.
Yeah,
In
and
pretty
the
unique areas.
horde rogues that are in Ironforge, literally just bursting people down for massive honor.
Well, then you're getting people that are not necessarily aware what's going on, people that are potentially AFK. You're getting those big full honor bursts out of that, and it's just, right back to the shadows until your next victim comes up. So big changes coming with Battlegrounds, but I'm with you guys. I anticipate World PvP will still happen. What I'm hoping will happen is we're going to see some of the rivalries that were formed during this phase come out, not only just in Battlegrounds. I think that if we play some of the teams that we've been going up against in the world in a Battleground, I think it's going to be a little bit more tense in Discord. But I also think it's going to make those matches in the world a lot more fun on the server going on as well. So very cool. Looking forward to that. And also the release of Phase 3 and Blackwing Lair coming in early 2020, according to the blue post that came up just this past week. So big changes coming to the World of Warcraft, a very, very dynamic world that we've had so far in Classic.
Okay, so BWL, in my opinion, is going to be the point where we start to see guilds unable to clear in Classic. Specifically, Vale and the very first boss. Like, our guild and many others that are more aware and are probably have people who have been playing the game that are able to put out a lot of DPS and know the mechanics, we're going to breeze right through it. But for people whose first time this is, they're going to have a bad time at Vale and even Lash Slayer, Broodlord.
There's a lot of difficult fights coming up in Blackwing Lair. One thing I remember is that you really started to feel each fight was earned. And if you're looking for that experience, Blackwing Lair is going to be very rewarding, I think, because you're going to have to fight and claw much harder than you did in Molten Core. One thing, though, that I've kind of noticed is there's enough knowledge going around with a lot of players throughout the server that you can definitely find the people that are going to be able to get you through this. But if you're going into this blind, I definitely agree with Candice that this is a big step up from Molten Core. And the DPS races especially, your damage per second matters. Your ability to heal through large amounts of damage is going to matter. So your health pools are going to start to make a big difference. And whether you communicate properly on fights like Chromagus are going to matter quite a bit as well. So now we're going to go ahead and move on now. We have a little bit somber news, not necessarily directly WoW Classic related, but the passing of Brad McQuaid happened this past week on November 18th. If you don't know who this is, he was a designer for the game EverQuest, which was one of our founding fathers in the MMO genre. I'm not going to okay boomer you with a lot of talk about EverQuest, but I will say that Classic WoW and Vanilla WoW specifically was very heavily influenced, and of course some of the more prominent members in the raid community in EverQuest would become lead designers for World of Warcraft. But Brad McQuaid did a lot for the MMO genre by pushing it forward quite a bit with EverQuest, and then later on with Vanguard, and then eventually Pantheon, Path of Exiled. So let's have a moment of silence for one of the founding fathers of MMORPGs, Brad McQuaid. Thank you very much for that, and we will move on. Thank you once again, Brad McQuaid, for all you've done for the MMO genre. All right, so we've got BWL coming up. We've talked about how it's going to be a step up from the previous raids. Let's talk a little bit about raid preparation today and how you can make your ride through BWL a lot simpler than it could potentially be if you don't prepare properly.
Sure. So there's a lot of aspects to raid preparation that we can talk about. We're not really gonna get into stuff like pre-raid best in slot for each class, just because there are a ton of guides, Icy Veins, Wowhead. There are probably even like half a dozen more on like what dungeons you can run to find your best gear. But obviously the starting point is like making sure your character is as geared as you can before stepping into each.
And another part would be making sure you understand the fights you're going to see and what your job and responsibility as your class is going to be.
These are important things for sure, because you can put in all of the pre-work, getting all of yourself the consumables, the raid buffs, everything, getting yourself the right gear. But if you're not functioning the way you want to in the raid, if you're not where you're supposed to be, all of that goes to waste. So that's the first thing that you got to do, is know what you're getting yourself into. And a lot of people are, in raids kind of get afraid to do this. Ask questions of your raid leaders if you do have them, because it makes all the difference. And they're going to almost always be more than happy to explain it. So,
yeah, going into a fight blind is a great way to waste a ton of gold and consumables and time and effort that you spend getting all these world buffs or whatever it is you're doing to prepare. All of that sort of goes down the drain if, you get cleaved early, or you blow the raid up with a bomb, or you're on the wrong target from the start. Like, all of that is sort of wasted if you're not actually ready for each of the fights.
but with that being said, there's definitely a lot that you can do on your end to prepare for getting ready for all of these fights and get yourself in the best shape you can to succeed. One of the first things that was brought up is having yourself a couple of gatherers. So what's this all about, Myth?
So, with obviously, when people think raid consumables, they think like flasks, they think potions, like consumables, Mongoose, Shadow Power, all of these potions. It's much easier to be prepared for raids once or twice, even 3 times a week, if you have a character that can go out in the world and get herbs on your own to do that. Like, many of the top raiders will have either as their secondary profession or an alt with herbalism, just because how important it is to get just the sheer number of herbs you need to make all of your consumables.
I've been using herbalism and mining since the very beginning of Classic, and one of the benefits that I've had throughout this is I haven't had to spend any gold on consumables other than every once in a while when I'm missing a mat or two. But for the most part, I'm just using this cache of mats that have just been building up since the beginning of Classic, and it kind of makes all the difference, really, because gold is hard to come by in this game, and being able to pick it up right off the ground is really effective, especially if you're out in the world playing the game a lot. You're going to just run into these items.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the number one thing that you can do to help yourself in preparing for the amount of consumables that you need for raid.
So short of having a profession like herbalism where you can pick up herbs and use those to potions, what are some of the other things that you should think about when getting prepared for a raid?
Making sure you have your mana pots, your health pots, your fire protection potion. Not leaving yourself to die.
Yeah, there's a lot of self-preservation that you can do throughout fights that really alleviates stress on your healers, who are going to be focusing on healing quite a few people to begin with.
One of my favorite ones to do in a raid is actually bandage myself. We all have bandages, we use them all the time, and that's a lot of health, and it doesn't waste time from a healer, but it gets me back in the fight right away.
I remember the first guild that I ever raided with in actual Classic WoW. As a rogue, you literally didn't get heals. It was your job to heal yourself throughout all the fights. So you had to have bandages, you had to have health potions, you had to have whipperroot tubers. Like, you can keep yourself alive if you're smart about it, and it just helps the healers.
And when you help the healers, you're really helping the whole raid, because once the healers go out of mana, that's the end of the engine. You're out of gas, your wipe is coming, and unless you're within 1%, get ready to run back. At least in terms of casters, we got some of the mana classes. There's some additional consumables that people should probably keep their eye on as well.
Yeah, dark runes, demonic runes. You want to get your tea, your Nightfin soup. You want that MP5. All these things are very important.
And it really just kind of goes back to the original point, was when you're out of mana, you can't keep going anymore. So these are the things that are going to help keep you in those fights and hopefully keep your guild from wiping and winning and collecting the loot.
Yeah, dark runes or demonic runes can really make or break clutch situations from a healing perspective.
And for those of you who don't know where you can find those are found off of most demons. Skolomance, you can pick those up as well. So if you're a caster, and you're in a group, by the way, maybe lobby a little bit for those dark runes. I know the policy when we run a guild group is to always give those to the healers for when we're raiding. So definitely try and get your hands on those. Another big one is world buffs. And there's so many world buffs in the game. There's almost too many of them to show up to every single raid with all of them. But these are a big part of your preparation as well.
Yeah, so as far as world buffs go, the big one that everybody knows, the two I would say are the Onyxia or the Nefarian Head, the Dragon Slayer buff. Really, that's just knowing when it's going out on your server for your faction. So it can go out raid wide or server wide every 12 hours per faction. So recognizing, oh, it looks like that there's no head up. Someone's probably going to put it up soon. Maybe I should have my main character in Stormwind or Orgrimmar ready to receive the buff, so I can log out with it before raid.
We raid a little bit later in the day, but we found that a lot of us can pick up the buff just by being available. Some other guild will put it up, and then we'll be able to get the buff as well. And it's kind of cool, too. It's a nice little meeting spot in Orgrimmar. You get to kind of see everybody at that time because everybody wants to get on that buff.
Right, and another thing you can do is just make relationships with people outside of your guild. Like, if you do that, you will find out when the heads are going up. This is not something people just do. They know when they're putting the heads up, and they'll tell you when they're putting the heads up.
Oh yeah, I remember when I got my Onyxia head. It was a very fun moment. I was letting everybody in Orgrimmar know, hey guys, the head is going up, get your buff. It's a fun thing to do, and getting everybody a buff is always kind of a communal thing that I think always puts everybody in good spirits. You get to go out there with a lot more power, and the Onyxia buff in particular is a big one. But there's some other ones that you have maybe a little bit more control over personally. The tribute buff, one of my personal favorites, the Songflower. What is the effect when you put all of these buffs together in a raid?
So you get things where you're killing bosses in like 45-50 seconds is what the effect, and I'm not exaggerating.
I want to say, and again, this is purely anecdotal evidence. We're not pulling out any hard numbers, but I can just say my best parses were when I've had my buffs available, and I would say on average they could sometimes affect as much as 200 DPS above my average, which is pretty impressive, I would say, for just spending a little bit of time, maybe the previous hour before the raid, picking up a couple extra. And that was, I had 3 stacked on my best DPSs, so it was getting a lot that day.
For sure. I mean, so our average Molten Core clear right now is about an hour and a half. Our fastest clear when we had a full raid full of people with Oni buffs and tribute buffs and Songflower, I think was a minute 16, or no, it was a minute and 6. We shaved almost 25 minutes off it by having all of these full buffs and like paying attention to keeping as many people alive with those buffs as long as possible.
Yeah, it also adds that little bit of extra level of, hey everybody, let's stay focused, don't cost anybody that time that you've had. But I will say this, some of our best Molten Cores have been when we're rolling, it gets a little bit more jovial because we're actually taking care of business, and then we do get to actually chat and have fun. I love Molten Core for that very reason. It's kind of the most fun, communal, get to know your guildies raid out of all of them.
Yeah, it's just a pretty low stress environment. Like 3/4 of the bosses are effectively trash pulls.
Yeah, they really, really are.
And it really is amazing because when I did all of these fights in vanilla the first time around, they gave us so much trouble. Ragnaros was not dying before we got Submergus. So many things have changed now that we've really min-maxed the game. So take advantage of that. I mean, I'm seeing so many guilds on our server clear Molten Core. We've got pug groups that are getting very, very far through it. And, that little bit of extra preparation could be the difference in a lot of those. So if you're running with a group that's getting very close, consider it. I'd actually, before we move on from the world buffs, I want to bring up one more that I think was a big part of our first Ragnaros kill, actually, on this server.
Yeah, so if your guild is having trouble with Ragnaros, he's obviously an incredibly challenging fight in Molten Core compared to the other bosses. Like, even we still have some pretty unclean Ragnaros kills. He does all fire damage. There's no physical damage dealt whatsoever. So there's actually a mob in Blackrock Spire. Right as you enter in, there's several pats in the first room of the orc bodyguards, but the casters, I think they're called evokers.
I believe that is the correct one. Yep.
They have a buff that they can cast that provides 83 fire resistance if you've mind controlled them. Well, they cast on themselves regardless, but if you have a priest mind control that mob, you can just rotate people in the raid into that Blackrock Spire, fully raid buff the entire group with an extra 80 fire resistance, and it's like night and day, the difference in Ragnaros' damage when everybody's resisting, 25 to 50% more of his damage.
Yeah, and you cruise through so much faster. Your healers have so much less stress. Your DPS spend more time doing DPS because they're not spending time healing themselves and things like that. It just makes everything go so much smoother. So if you're on the cusp of a Ragnaros kill, I highly recommend checking out that fire resistance buff. It may be enough to tip you over the top.
No, it really will. We were struggling, and our very first kill difference between them having that buff and them not was it literally made our kill. Like, we weren't gonna kill it without it.
By the next week too, we had enough loot and everything to where we didn't even need it. We just needed it that first week, but for that first kill, it was instrumental in us being able to tip it over the top when, we still had many people in green still and hadn't filled out their pre-raid bis and all of that. So with all that being said, of course, coming with pre-raid bis and consumables and world buffs and all of this is going to make it easier. But if you take a look at Warcraft logs, not everybody that's parsing at the highest is actually getting all of these things every single time. I know I can't get all the buffs every single time. It's too difficult to get 4 or 5 buffs every time. But when I do, it's great. But I'm taking a look. What's going on with some of these people that are parsing really high, but maybe not necessarily using all these items and buffs?
So there's definitely variance in how well you can do. I think the best example of this is I've seen parses on Magmadar where 2 different warriors have very different gear. One warrior's wearing like pre-raid bis weapons, like an Axe of the Deep Woods and a flurry axe, versus another warrior who's got a Deathbringer and a Brute Blade. They're both in the same raid, and the warrior with the Axe of the Deep Woods has less buffs and does more damage than this other warrior who's got all the buffs and the best weapon possibly available. There's really just some variance, and if you actually break down the damage that these 2 warriors dealt, it comes down to like skill usage. At what time did each warrior pop their cooldowns, and whether or not did they get a ton of execute crits? Like, it can be the same thing with casters too. The difference between an orange parse and a blue parse could just be spell resists.
Yeah, and I think what the important thing to remember is that if your total isn't always exactly what you wanted it to be, that may not necessarily tell the entire story. What you want to do, in my opinion, is control the controllables. optimize what you're doing, and you're just going to see higher parses more often. And do what you can do to get the most out of that. You're going to see higher numbers more often than not. But don't rely on that thinking that that's going to tell you the whole story. Always be refining. I can say as a DPS warrior now, I had a very clear idea of what to do going into this, but I'm definitely better now than I was when we ran our first Molten Core.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's Mao's completely correct. Keep iterating on the things that you're doing, changing out, just making sure you're using your abilities correctly. It's really it makes a world of difference.
Well, and especially when we have a lot of information available to us the way we do, little minute things that you do end up making a lot of difference over the long haul. So knowing like, all right, I actually do have enough rage to throw this heroic strike, or this is the right time to be popping my cooldowns, can have a big effect on those overall numbers. And everybody's looking to push those numbers, get those higher, faster kills, and get those top the charts. So that's the little things that you can do to help yourself along the way are big. Another big one that I think gets slept on a little bit is enchants. And the cool thing about enchants to me is that they're a little bit more unique. They come with some unique effects that some of the buffs do. Do you care to touch a little bit on some of these unique effects on the enchants?
First of all, the Crusader weapon enchant for melee users is basically irreplaceable the entire expansion. I guess if you're a dagger rogue, 5 weapon damage ends up being better for your main hand for math reasons, but I don't know. I feel like enchants show a great deal more than you really think they do, right? Like something like a bracer enchant isn't going to be super interesting because it's just some strength or some stamina, but when you have things like movement speed to boots, that can really make or break your survivability on a fight like Baron Geddon, where you're trying to run out of his AoE fire and you suddenly get the bomb and you're in the middle of the raid group now.
Right, and that little bit of difference can really matter. Movement speed to me is completely irreplaceable. There's no amount of like agility on the boots that you could add that would make me think, oh yeah, I'd rather have that than movement speed, because getting places quicker, being able to avoid mobs, and use your slowing skills to help yourself survive are all the little things that you can do to help make a raid successful. Not everything is going to go exactly according to plan. So having that ability to weasel your way out of those rough situations is big. Candice, do you care to touch a little bit on some of the caster enchants?
So the caster enchants are kind of interesting, right? Because basically everything you're going for is either healing power or damage, but there's only 2 slots that currently give those in the game. So you're going for stats, basically on every other piece of gear. Mana. You're going to things to let you cast longer. Priests are kind of individually different because they also scale off spirit. But like for a shaman, for instance, spell power and healing on your weapon is basically end all, but they're so much more expensive than their melee counterpart. Almost like 4 or 5 times as expensive as Crusader. Like not even, it's just disgusting.
It's kind of funny how it worked out there, because I would say most of us, if we're expecting a weapon sometime soon, we'll keep those Crusader mats readily available, get that thing slapped on right away. The caster enchants are quite expensive, and I would say maybe feel a little bit less impactful, but at the same time, when it comes to maximizing a character, it's kind of hard to compare melee to caster too.
Yeah, that's true, but for damage, for instance, you really do want to scrape out every advantage you can get. So the spell damage you're really going to go for on the weapon, because it's only like 250 or something gold on our server. But for healers, the plus 55 enchant is like 450 gold in mat, which is half an epic mount, by the way.
It's really that high?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and for comparatively, I think Crusader ran me maybe 75 gold or so, and I had to do it twice, so 150 for 2 weapons. And, that's That's definitely a difference. There's a big difference between that.
Yeah, I mean, in the exact boat you just talked about, though, like I'm still waiting for a one-hander to drop, and I have 2 righteous orbs and 4 large brilliant crystals just in my bag at all times. Whenever I get a new weapon, I just go farm 2 more. I'm just always like, it's just something that I'm always prepared for.
Right, because you don't want to be spending a moment without Crusader on those weapons, or in the case that you have a enchant that's better than Crusader for math reasons, there are a couple situations where that's the case. But whatever that may be, you want to be ready to hit their hardest with those weapons, especially when you get new ones that are really strong. So don't sleep on enchants. They come with a lot of unique effects. Even if you're a caster, they're not necessarily going to affect you the way that they might a melee, but they are going to help you maximize your character and get the most out. And this would just be universal. I would say PvE, PvP, get the minor speed to boots. It's a good feel when you can outrun somebody, and it's also helpful when you can get where you need to be quicker.
So one correction real quick.
Oh,
I got them
absolutely.
reversed. The healing power is about 200, 250 gold right now. It's the spell damage that's 400 plus gold, right?
Those are golden pearls.
Oh, right. Yeah, golden pearls are mega
Yeah.
in price at the moment.
Yeah, it's 100 gold just in golden pearls, and then I'm looking at it right now. It's 4 essence of air, water, and fire, 12 greater eternals, and 4 large brilliants. So there's your cost.
Yeah, that's a pretty large cost. Greater Eternals also very expensive, and Golden Pearls are just plain rare. They're hard to come by for sure. So you add all of this stuff up together. What's the sum? You come with your enchants, you come with your raid buffs, you've done all of these things. What's it going to mean to you and your experience in World of Warcraft?
Well, so I do want to add one more thing to before we sort of talk about how it sums up, just as far as enchants. I really from the like the other side of things, not necessarily like your performance, like overall performance with these enchants or how they change your gameplay, but if you're actively looking to join a guild, from the perspective of someone who does recruitment and interviews, enchants very much make or break whether or not I approve of people who are applying to the guild that I'm in. Seeing 2 people who have similar gear, but one of them has full enchants, it's almost like a no-brainer to me. Just for and it's that way for I would say most people who are in progress guilds at this point. It's really just a way to set yourself apart from other people.
Absolutely. You would kind of look at it like dressing well for an interview or something like that, where you just want to make sure that you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's, putting your best foot forward, so to speak. And, you know, if you're trying to get into a competitive guild with competitive raid spots, those things are absolutely going to matter. And they are going to matter a little bit to the performance as well. But I think it's also important to make sure that if you're trying to be a part of a guild that's trying to maximize their WoW time, you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to show that you're committed as well.
Exactly. Now, to your previous question, how does all of this sort of add up? One, depending on the class you play, it's gonna really make the game more fun for you. From the perspective of a warrior, which is what I'm playing, having all of these raid buffs and consumables going into a raid, the class just feels better. I have much more crit, my rage generation is far higher, and I get to see bigger numbers all the time. Like it is a more enjoyable time for me to see 3 rows of raid buffs and to just do incredible damage all the time. It's probably going to be, I mean, can to speak with this, but I would assume it's also way nicer from a caster perspective to not go every 14 seconds.
That's very true, but there is a extreme difference between the amount of buffs you can take in as a mere beneficial, where in like response to like a caster. Like for instance, as a healer, I can basically get distilled wisdom and sages. And distilled wisdom isn't even useful because I just used mana pots and I don't need it. There's almost it's to the point where I bring my food and I bring mana potions and dark runes, and that's pretty much all I'm taking in now.
Well, that's going to change once we get to harder content.
Yeah, I guess that's probably true.
The point of this is not necessarily talking about farm status, molten, but just overall like good preparation practices.
Well, and this kind of does bring up a point, though, because there are players out there who are like, hey, wait a second. Does this actually really have an effect on me? Am I going to really notice a difference? And I know a lot of players that have an attitude like that for sure. I know Candice definitely shows up to put up the numbers in what it is that he's doing in the raid, but to somebody that maybe is just saying like, no, I'm not going to do all of this, I would definitely say you'd be surprised at what a difference it could make, or the situation that might happen that you're not necessarily accounting for, that maybe getting that extra 15% stamina from a dire maul might have made the difference for.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I absolutely agree. How many times whenever I die, I always look at the amount of overkill and think to myself, could a Flask of Titan saved me here? Could the Dire Maul buff have saved me here? And if they had, especially as a tank, that's a really important difference.
I was off-tanking a few things in Molten Core for a stretch, and I did not have very good tank gear. I was taking a little bit of flack from Candice about the tank gear, in fact. But one of the things that I did to kind of mitigate that was I was using Flask of the Titans. And I remember one of our early major Domo kills, I went down to about 200 health, and I went, that was Flask or Wipe right there, boys.
Year was a little rough, but we're finally starting to get to the point where it's maybe not as necessary.
Flask of the Titans has got to be one of the most impactful buffs you could have in a raid, because it's so much HP.
People that I wouldn't have seen Titans in vanilla Titans now, just because it can really make the difference between you staying alive or not. It made a huge difference to my Molten Cores early on. And like I said, on that major Domo in particular, I remember seeing that health bar get real low, and then the healer's making a great recovery. So that little bit of health was, it was the difference maker that particular time. So you'll never know what that difference is going to be until you hit that situation, but you're going to see a lot less of those, and things are going to go a lot more smoothly when you maximize. So with that being said, do we have anything else to talk about in terms of raid buffs and consumables?
Yeah, so we're talking about Flask of Titans and how useful it is for tanks, but I have down core to those stupid trash packs after Baron Geddon by dying to a margin of I don't know, 300 overkill. That
little bit right there. Casters who are very, very squishy, rogues, not a lot of health. Consider it. If you're having a hard time staying alive, definitely consider it, and especially if you're an herbalist. One of the reasons I felt good about it is I had been collecting Black Lotuses since I was level 42, so I had a little cash to experiment with, so to speak, before doing it, and I realized, this was actually helpful to the raid and my raid experience, and I had a better time by putting in that little bit of gold to it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that Chromatic Resistance doesn't do more as a flask, because I would expect that the ideal thing would be for Chromatic Resistance to be a usable flask in that situation. But
it would be usable if they just took away Black Lotus from its cost.
That's kind of my thought, because 30 Ice Cap, 10 Silver Sage, and a Black Lotus is way too much for 25 all res.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to discount how important resistance is, especially after we just talked about how we had our first Ragnaros kill because of the resistance, but it is a huge difference. But when we're talking about a 50 gold per week item, plus some of the other costs that go into it, now you're starting to get into that way. Is 25 gold, is 25 resistance to all worth that much? That's maybe a little bit more debatable. I think you're going to run into less situations where the resistance is going to make a difference than maybe that health would on people that are tanking, or maybe some of your lower health melees.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no situation from a perspective of either a tank or DPS warrior where I would take 25 all res over 1200 health. Like 1200 health is just superior.
Yeah, that's just absolutely massive. I mean, hey, with Battlegrounds coming out, I might even pop a flask if I get a really, really good Battlegrounds match, guys. I'm just saying.
Yeah, when you have flasks on you, so when you go up against, another team that's pushing Grand Marshal or High Warlord, that you know is going to be a long match.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see that all in some really, really competitive matches, especially ones where you go up against players that you know are very skilled, maybe some of the well-known players. As we talked about last week, cross-server Battlegrounds will be out, so you may go up against some people that you might have heard of eventually, so be ready for that.
Well, the important thing to note, too, especially if you're coming to Classic as a newer Classic player, but someone who's played retail, Warsong Gulch does not have a time limit. There's nothing that makes Warsong Gulch end other than getting 3 caps. So, I've been in several hour-long Warsong Gulches before, back in the day, and it's a strong possibility that that's going to happen again with really good teams.
At that point, I think the meta has actually changed. Those teams are going to leave. Like, they know that there's no reason for them to continue if they're preventing themselves from gaining honor.
Yeah, I guess with Cross Realm, that might be different, because all those several hour Battlegrounds that I were in back in the day were all before Cross Realms were added. So if the other team left, all that would really happen is it would queue into us again.
Right, there was a lot less of incentive. We had kind of the same issue. I was on a server that had a lot more Horde than Alliance, and I was playing on the Horde side, and we were cursed with long queues, and then we'd play the same team over and over. The virtue that we got by is we were an organized group, and the pugs, couldn't beat that. So even though we were having these long battles, it still, we were able to get our honor just by eventually grinding our way through them. But it was, there were some rough ones, and it created a meta of playing extreme defense.
I've seen some nigh unkillable flag carriers in my day. I think the one that sticks out the most, I remember when I first did Battlegrounds on Horde side, there was a paladin that had full tier 3 and the tanking shield from Nax. They had like 12k raid buffed hit points in a battleground, and they were just unkillable. Like, you literally couldn't do it. I don't think I ever once saw that paladin die.
Yeah, just think about that. He not only has 12,000 health, he actually has about 36 to 40,000 effective health. Because Lay on Hands completely feels he bubbles and will full heal himself in 4 or 5 heals.
But he also has 2 other people healing him, as well as other DPS peeling for him. Like, again, it's if you're a paladin and a flag and want to play Warsong Gulch, you're going to be very good at flag carrying.
I also wonder if we're going to maybe see the meta shift to more Alterac Valleys. I think that the style of play today almost suits Alterac Valley in a certain sense. Like, I remember back when I played on Vanilla, we did a lot of 40-man AE group queues in Alterac Valley, and that may be less likely to run into a stalemate if you can get that together.
Well, you can't. Again, this will be dependent on whether or not you can queue as a group in AV. Because they didn't add that until the end of Burning Crusade. You could only queue as 5 people. And like, even though a 5-person can make a pretty big difference in AV, it can't win the game.
Yeah, 5 is definitely not going to sway it that much. I'm trying to remember how we skirted this back then. Maybe we all queued simultaneously or around the same time or something like that. But I do remember some of my vanilla groups were pretty coordinated 40-man groups for Alterac Valley. And I'm wondering if they're going to see a little bit of that as being about the meta the same. Although I do also remember a bunch of us solo queuing and just trying to all jump into the queue together too.
Yeah, I think I want to say there was an add-on that would like coordinate a raid queue. But I don't remember exactly.
That'll be one interesting. If anybody who is listening on YouTube, saw this on Reddit, comment on what you remember for how the Alterac Valley queue went. So, with all that being said, we've talked about raid consumables, what they mean to our raid. We've got Battlegrounds coming out. We've got Blackwing Lair coming out. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on our server lately, guys. How's Grobbulus been?
Oh boy.
Yeah. So, it's gotten spicy, to say the least. Some rivalries have been created. Things have not cooled down in terms of world PvP. It's definitely hard to get to dungeons. We couldn't before the podcast. What have you guys been seeing out there, in Grobbulus in particular?
So, not so much what I've seen, but what we have been doing. We've basically made Dire Maul like 3 times a week, and not a dungeon Alliance can go to. And Mao has even been with us when we've done it sometime.
Oh yeah, I've pushed a lot of honor this week. I've done my fair share, certainly more than my fair share than I did in Phase 1. I probably got a few people that don't want to listen to the podcast, actually, because of the amount of time I've spent PvPing. But that being said, it's definitely gone both ways. I made a comment that the first few days were very Horde dominated on the podcast last week. The Alliance have definitely pushed back.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They have definitely showed up this week in full force. They are, and it seems that their response times have been pretty incredible to counter group.
Well, one of the cool things that we had, obviously with the phase coming out, we saw the world bosses, and the Horde got the first couple world bosses, final boss got those, but then the Alliance got the next Azergos kill, and then I believe the third or fourth Kha'Zix kill by really mobilizing large groups. Goof, I think, was the guild that got them, but I believe the Obsidian Coalition, which is about 5 or 6 different Alliance guilds, were all taking part of it, and they mobilized very quickly. It was a blast to be there, even though we weren't involved in the killing. It was just everybody, it felt like everybody on the server was at that Azergos.
Yeah, I
No.
think I came in at the tail end of it, but it was, man, the server was so wacky. It was incredible. Just people like loading in and out of my screen because there were so many in the area.
It was lagging in the best way possible, though. Like, the exact kind of way you want classic WoW to lag, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me of what it's going to be like when the AQ gates open.
Oh man, I don't even want to think about what that's going to be like when it comes to PvP.
Our server is going to be a bombshell when it
Yeah.
wins.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know that everybody's gonna be there, everybody's gonna want a piece of the pie, and it's just gonna be absolute chaos. And a lot of the rivalries that are getting formed right now are gonna be persisting through Battlegrounds, through the opening of the gates of AQ. I think that this phase was really, really important to waking everybody up and kind of creating some of those rivalries, even if it has meant some moments of dissatisfaction, like not being able to get to a dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, there are times where I'm very happy that it's happening, and there are times where I'm definitely more frustrated. But even as a person who's been doing a lot less world PvP, I've run into several people from the Alliance that I'm starting to know by name. Shout out to Left Shark, who's had quite a few battles with me that have been pretty fun. And I'm looking, if he's actually one of the people who pushes Grand Marshal. I've had quite a few battles, group versus group, with a no more named Money, who I think has got a great contender for one of the best Grand Marshal name title combinations that there can be.
Oh yeah, we've had some battle with Money in the boys for sure. We've gotten well acquainted over the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure when we hit that battle in Battlegrounds, we're going to be bringing it a little bit extra hard for those guys for sure.
Yeah, I see. This is part of the reason why I really wish that cross faction wasn't coming in, at least not right away. I feel like all these rivalries we're making now and these relationships we're making on our server, even though they're hostile to an extent, they're still like an intricate part of this experience that we all wanted to relive. Like when you were battling the people on your server that you knew, it makes it really feel like you're not just fighting, X guy across the country here. It makes you feel like you're actually fighting someone you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when I think that it would have been cool if maybe they had a phase, what maybe lasted a few weeks or maybe a month or something where it wasn't cross-faction and then they switched it over to the cross-faction. The only issue I worry about is queue times. And if we're getting hour-long queues, it really hurts the Battleground experience. But I definitely want to have more matches with players from Grobbulus, honestly, because we've had such great battles over these 2 weeks, and I would love to go crew to crew up against some of these people that I've met. For the most part, though, everybody has been super cool and respectful. Almost everybody that I've been out there PvPing with has been great, and shout out to the guys from Goof, the guys from Obsidian Council. You guys have been giving us great battles, so many more. And also, congratulations, by the way, to Left Shark, who was the #1 on the Alliance side last week in PvP ranking. And congratulations to Crunchy, who was #1 on the Horde side.
Yeah, I'm again not to be in a place where we're bragging, but I'm extremely proud of the mastermind crew that's been PvPing. We've got, I think, 3 of the top 5 server PvPers. With big shout out to Crunchy, Travels, and Ziff, who are pretty much just killing it nonstop.
Yep, I've been PvPing with, especially with Zith and Travels a lot. Also have several other masterminders that are in the top 50 as well. Quite a few of us are senior sergeants already, and hopefully more to come. There's definitely been some changing, though, in the meta in terms of PvP, and I think this week we're seeing the rise of the rogues. I know there's some guys like Ember Strife out there who's got huge numbers in terms of the PvP, so there's a lot's been getting figured out in the ways to do world PvP the best.
Yeah, the rogues have definitely developed a strategy here.
With the amount of time and effort that you guys have been putting in, what rank do you think you'll be next week?
Personally, I'm hoping to sneak into rank 6, and I think that the top tier PvPers this week have a chance to get most of the way through 6, and potentially maybe even one of them being able to sneak into 7 if they were able to go #1 back to back. But for the most part, I think we're going to see a lot of rank 6 among the people that were in the quote-unquote 13 and 14 bracket.
They could reach 7 this week. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'm hoping to hit 5 next week on my hunter. That's just my goal.
Because you can start getting some of the really good PvP gear at, what, 7 or 8?
I think once you hit just past that, it starts getting into the tiered gear. That first kind of blue stuff is for the lower levels, and then you get into the set stuff, which has some real nice pieces. Big PvE impact as well. So if you're grinding casually, maybe you're not necessarily trying to push for a high rank like some of the people are. Try to maybe grind out like 9 or 10 casually. You can do that on much less than what the people that are going for the top tier ranks are going for.
And I mean, a point to bring up too that we didn't touch on when we were talking about the early release of Battlegrounds. With the release of Alterac Valley, there are almost a dozen of pre-raid or even raid best in slot pieces that come from that zone that are very easy to get. Exalted Alterac Valley doesn't really require that much PvP at all, even if you're not a PvP.
Yeah, it's a big zone. There's a lot to do in it. There's quests to do. There's PvE objectives that actually help your team with the PvP objectives. So there's things that you can kind of do on your own, or you can kind of work with the group and PvP that way. But Alterac is something that any player that wants to gear up certain spots like ring, weapon, I think there's quite a few other items that are going to be upgrades for a lot of people, but there's a lot of stuff there. I kind of have my eye on the Unstoppable Force just because if I don't happen to get a weapon in between now and then, that's going to be my first goal, is get one of those.
I can tell you from the point of view of our loot council, we will be very depressed if Unstoppable Force is your first two-handed weapon.
Well, it's great to hear that, but unfortunately the loot council does not get to control the loot unless Stewie is the seed.
Yeah, it's been our warrior loot luck has been very, very lacking overall. But no, it's really not just the Unstoppable Force. The Don Julio's ban for all melee DPS is best in slot through BWL. There's caster offhands that are far superior to the Aquamentus offhands for every class. I think the Shadow one is like 8 stamina, 34 shadow power. I think the healing one is just like 54 healing, 3 MP5. it's incredibly OP if you're not a priest using a benediction.
Yeah, and there's just so many great upgrades that, again, very grindable. If you don't have some of them, first thing you're going to do, hit that Alterac Valley. Again, you can do it by yourself, just almost as effectively as you can in groups and things like that too. So definitely a good one to hit up. Anything else? We've had some big moments in PvP. Obviously, PvP is the big focus on Grobbulus right now. But one of the kind of cool things I've noticed, there's a lot of pug groups going on in the server. I'm starting to see a lot of our alts hit 60 now, and we're getting involved in some of the pug groups that are going on. What have been the experiences with those?
So there's a huge raiding pug community on Grobbulus, and I don't just mean like you can find a pug every day. I mean there are multiple 40-mans that are filling every day of pugs for Horde, and it's just as long as you're keyed and able to go, you'll get an invite.
That's really awesome to hear, because back in the days of vanilla, pug molten core was very, very rare, and it was almost kind of looked down upon almost. I'm happy to hear that there's a lot of options for players, and some of you guys were racking up the loot in those pugs. I was blown away.
I mean, Crunchy joined our guild with a mage blade from a pug.
So there you go. You can get your mage blade all the way through that. If you didn't already get in on some of these groups, there's some really good ones. Candice, I think you were in one that was clearing pretty deep in the other day, right?
Yeah, we got to Major Domo, actually.
What guild hosted that, if you don't mind sharing that?
Rec hosted it.
Awesome, and Rec was one of the first 10 guilds on this server to clear Ragnarok, so it just gives you an idea of the quality of pugs that you can find on this server if you happen to be looking for a raid group this week.
I've also pugged before, too. I ran a pug group with a guild called Duskbringers. It's more of a late night group, but they were really cool, and they actually cleared Rag.
Wow, that's very impressive. And, to get a group of people together that you don't necessarily know and have a whole lot of experience with, and then go in there and clear bosses that effectively, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's good coordination and patience from the leadership of the pugs.
I think it's a really good sign for the community and health of the community for Horde side on our server. The fact that we're able to run so many groups, not just run them, but fill them and kill content. It's a really good sign for how healthy this server is.
Absolutely, and I imagine the Alliance side probably has a bit of the same. If anybody knows, definitely hit me up. I would be happy to hear what is going on in terms of the Pugs Alliance side. PvP has definitely been getting the focus. One thing that I would definitely say to those who are doing a lot of PvP, once you get that DR on that guy, especially those lower levels, maybe let's ease up on them just a teeny bit. I know they're getting a good classic experience, but everything is fair in game until you get that DR, right, guys?
Well, I would say as far as a PSA and be kind to even the opposite faction. Just remember that world PvP and that competitive PvP is not camping one person as a group of 5 people. That's not...
Absolutely not.
It's never fun when that happens to you. And sure, you're going to kill people soon after they res because, they attacked you first, and there's always going to be that. But once you've beaten someone down, just kind of let them go and get back to fighting people who are actually trying to fight you over someone who's clearly just trying to get away or get into a dungeon and has died several times to your group of people.
Well, and I think that should extend to I'm with people right now that are grabbing every honor point they can, but personally, I kind of feel like 48s are off the table. Anyone that's below 50 is off the table right now. And 50 themselves.
I'll admit, I've been particularly cruel. I've been telling my guys to follow the 47s until they ding, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's it. Just think about, so these aren't just other people, right? They're not just mobs for you to kill for honor points. These are people on your server playing in your economy and community. You're stealing effectively time from them when you kill them. Especially at such a low level, you're getting basically no honor for killing them. And you're just stealing time from them. Especially if it's a res across the zone, that's like 20 to 30 minutes in a run back sometimes.
Honor does get difficult to find, and once you've sort of exhausted the usual suspects, you do sort of have to start looking for some people that aren't on DR. And it gets a little bit of a challenge. What I would recommend, because even with us saying all of that, I don't think a whole lot of that ganking is going to stop. Pick up things like invis potions and things like that. I know it's a couple of gold. It can be a little bit of a pain, but it might actually mean the difference between you getting away. You can hearth when you're invised. You can get on your mount while you're invised, and people aren't going to be able to find your exact res spot right away. And even some of the add-ons like Spy, which will let people know that you're invisible, are hard to find if you just move in a direction that they're not anticipating, and you'll know where they are and not. It's a little bit of an extra step that you might have to take right now, but I've been having to use that trick quite a bit because it's brutal out there, even for the high levels that have strong gear and are out there a lot.
Oh yeah, it is. It's very hectic. You think you're doing well, and then you run into 3 rogues camping behind a corner.
Yeah, I mean, I just recently hit the 3 druid, 1 Shadow Meld Hunter, 1 Rogue group, and I mean, they basically camped me until I got back to a town.
Yeah, and it's gotten pretty fierce like that for quite a bit of this phase, so hopefully Battlegrounds will have a little bit to ease that up when it comes, but in the meantime, just be prepared. People are out ganking, try to outsmart them. It might even mean wait a minute or two until you see them mount away and then make your escape, but try to be crafty and outsmart them because they're definitely going to be out there for at least until December 10th. So plan for it as much as you can. Today we have a new segment on the show. It is called the Grobbulus Name of the Week. The winners of the Grobbulus Name of the Week can open a trade window with me, and I will give you 1 gold. If you're an Alliance side member and you have a Grobbulus Name of the Week, I will buy a linen cloth from you on the neutral auction house. Just let me know when it's up, and I will go do it. So, without further ado, we have our first Name of the Week, a Feral Druid named Will Ferrell. Congratulations, Will Ferrell. Open up a trade window with me anytime you see me, and I will give you 1 gold. All right, guys. Oh, I had one more thing that I thought was kind of exciting. We had the, as far as anybody has known, the first Baron mount has dropped on Grobbulus. Wow.
I hadn't heard that or seen it. Who got it?
Yep. Myron, a troll. Looks like he is a rogue, has a Baron mount now. So congratulations, Myron. Super cool. Everybody on Grobbulus is currently jealous of you.
Yeah, I mean, that's rarer than Sulfuris. That's incredible.
Yeah,
I wish I had a Baron mount.
I know a lot of people that have tried for long stretches of times and never saw it, so it's super cool. That is, you're definitely going to be standing out there, Myron. Congratulations once more. All right, well, if that's all we have today, I think we're ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right, well, thank you, Myth and Candice, for joining me today. It was great having you both, and I look forward to doing it again next week.
See you guys next week.
Absolutely, I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, well, thanks everybody for listening. Our weekly upload on YouTube is Tuesdays, so look for it on there. You can also find our posts on the Grobbulus subreddit and learn more about what the show is going to be doing. If you'd like an interview on the show, we are currently conducting interviews and getting people from the server of Grobbulus, from the classic WoW community and beyond. So let me know, hit me up on YouTube or Reddit. And of course, please like and subscribe or leave a comment below if you liked the show or some content that you'd like to hear. All right, signing out. Thanks everybody.
Later, man.
Peace.